Gadget, Trinket, Doodad, Device. A OOQ fic by scioscribe. Read by Lynx Panther. Summary. If Bond wants a shoehorn that can also pick locks, it's Q's job to give it to him. Well, actually it's not, but for some reason he keeps getting talked into it anyway. Also, he's been making a genuinely excessive number of things that explode. Q had originally attracted the attention of the British government at 16, when he had hacked the Prime Minister's system and used the account to pirate American television episodes. He'd done it only because he'd been hacking into their system routinely since he'd been about 11, and he was getting a bit irritated that they never realized it. Honestly, did he really want to live in a country with such pitifully secured networks? You, he said, and if Bond thought he was spotty at 28, he should have seen him at 16, when his complexion had been an utter disaster. Need me. And M had agreed. M16 paid his way through university. They weren't fond of his tendency to show up only for the exams if the class was worthless, which half of them were. Then they'd moved him about the globe, and he'd learned Russian and Chinese, or at least enough in both to order tea and then complain about it, and everywhere he went, people had listened to what he told them and considered him important. Then he came to London to complain about the tea in his native tongue, and got made James Bond's quartermaster, which he knew within 20 minutes would be dreadful and probably give him some sort of nervous condition besides, because Bond listened to only one in every dozen things Q told him, and considered him important in the same way Bond considered knives important, sharp and likely to help him kill people. Furthermore, Bond kept being charming at the most inopportune moments, exactly when Q was intending to take some sort of firm line on refusing to make him some sort of ludicrous special device. Which is why he found himself in one of the tech labs at 3 in the morning, Q disrespected clocks, as a rule, toying with parts. Eve, who kept M's hours, which was to say that she was there almost constantly and appeared to live on coffee, catnaps, and take-out curries, watched him for a few minutes while scrolling through her email. Q kept trying to improve her filters, but there were always more people who wanted to talk to Eve than she could reasonably answer, and finally said, "I give up. What is it?" "So far, a disaster. I'm not as good with metalwork." "What's it intended to be?" "A sophisticated iteration of a simple concept designed to slip past casual checks. In short, if Bond wants a shoehorn that can also pick and/or reprogram locks, it's my job to give it to him." "It's not, actually," she said. "No, it's not, but yet, here I am. You really have to wonder who uses a shoehorn these days anyway." He made a tentative adjustment and eyed the results. Not promising. I suppose it's his business if he wants people to assume he's old-fashioned instead of, well, prone to breaking into and/or out of places. I'm lucky he hasn't asked me to make it explode. He's very partial to things that explode. "I'm sensing a marked partiality," Eve said, "and it isn't his. Fancying Bond is something I don't even remotely have the time for." "I understand perfectly. You're making him a lock-picking shoehorn at 3 in the morning because your feelings about him are neutral, as though for a potted plant. Actually, I'm rather fond of potted plants. Creates a natural energy. Does this look like a shoehorn at all? It does pick locks, but I think it might look like it." "Perhaps a post-apocalyptic shoehorn? Useful in the event of a zombie invasion. You're here as well, you know." "It's my job to be here," she said. "It's not your job to make every gadget, trinket, doodad, and device that crosses Bond's mind. Or yours, for that matter. In fact, at this exact moment, it is my job to tell you that M's a bit cross that you keep listing them as line items when they're of very questionable use. Not to mention very clearly Bond's idea, with the exception of the iPod body sensor, which was certainly yours." "How'd you know?" "I worked with Bond. I don't think he's ever owned an iPod in his life. Stop making him things he doesn't need." "I can finish this shoehorn, though," Q said, in what he felt was reasonable and not at all petulant voice. "Since I'm well in now." "Then not exploding a shoehorn of repression," Eve said musingly. "Maybe you could make a device that, like the wizard, would give you some kind of courage." "I have courage. You ought to have seen me taking that spider out of the tub the other day." "He likes you, you know," she said. "He said so." "I know what you're talking about. And what he actually said was, 'You're more interesting than most people,' which is not the same thing. And anyway, it's irrelevant because I don't fancy him. Because I don't fancy people who don't own iPods and who interrogate me as to the usefulness of my job. Thank you very much. And I can still make him things if I use my own money for it." Eve said, "I'm going to write this down on a note so you don't lose it," and wrote, in large capital letters, "You are ridiculous," on a post-it note. She stuck it to his forehead before leaving. "I liked you better as a field agent," he called after her. It was around 8 in the morning when he unveiled the shoehorn to Bond, who examined it and said, "It picks locks. And helps you put on shoes. That is what shoehorns are supposed to do, aren't they? Not working in footwear and not being well into my 70s, I wasn't certain. But yes, both." He slid another box across the table. "I had extra time, so I made you this, but under no circumstances are you to tell M or Eve Because apparently I'm to stop using departmental funds to make you things that look like ordinary things until they explode. Whereupon they look like shrapnel. So this is the last. It's a condom, Bond said, which is appropriate, because it's for protection. You thought it would be a good idea to give me a condom that explodes. Oh right, your habit of sleeping with people on missions. That hadn't crossed my mind. He glanced down at Eve's post-it note and felt part of his mind, a very obnoxiously smug part, agreeing with it. The Freudian nature of it all. Well, doubtless he'd understand that better if he'd gone to more of his psychology classes than the exams. You'll have to be careful, I suppose. Anyway, like I said, it's the last of the exploding objects trend, since I've had 3 separate emails and a moneypenny visit to the effect of stop catering to Bond's nostalgia. Is that what you've been doing? No, Q said, as deadpan as he could manage. I was looking forward to a whole series of mundane explosives, ones that looked like cheese, cats, ties, money clips. Eventually, I intended to create a version of you that explodes, only the technology isn't quite there yet. Not everything has to explode, Bond said. He was still looking at the condom. Some things simmer, and everything you make has its uses. Q's mouth went a little dry. Does it? Exploding pyrophylactics aside, the glasses with the thermal imaging saved my life. I do like making things that save your life, Q said. He just hadn't known Bond thought about them that way. He did always bring them back broken, or wobbling to the left, always the left for some reason. But fieldwork was tricky. The circumstances weren't controlled after all. He glanced again at the "you are ridiculous" note and said, "Can you put the exploding condom down, maybe?" Bond did, lips quirked in what would have been a smile if it hadn't been James Bond doing it, because Q had never seen Bond smile, and if Bond were going to smile, it wouldn't be at him, probably, except for how he made useful things that kept Bond alive, and non-useful things that nevertheless blew up in a charming, if vaguely unpredictable way. I'm not old, you know, Bond said, a little abruptly to Q's mind. Shoehorns can be practical, I'm sure. The iPod was practical, for music in addition to the body-sensing element. I also put Pong on there, Q said. Bond held up the shoehorn. This doesn't explode? Sorry. Q could think very, very quickly under certain circumstances, although he could not usually think very quickly and very usefully at the same time, so his rapid internal monologue then was something along the lines of, does he think I think he's old? I don't think he's old. Look at him. He thinks I'm young. Is this about the bit with the painting? Because I was just trying to be impressive. But he only said the thing about spots after I said the part about the ship. Oh, he liked the iPod. I wonder if he found the playlist. It just lets you get into things, he said, trying to recover himself, and helps you with shoes, in some fashion. I could show you, Bond said, and without waiting for Q to catch up with him, he got down on one knee and drew Q's foot toward him. His hands were warm and steady, firm hands into which Q had given everything already, now he thought about it. He'd given Bond the work of his mind in hours, to give Bond whatever he wanted, whatever would keep him safe, whatever would be a confession of sorts for what he hadn't wanted to admit. He'd been making Bond valentines, pressing them into his hands, and now Bond's hands were on his calf and his ankle. I am having, Q said, a series of epiphanies. Bond's smile, and it was a smile, deepened. I don't ask just anyone to make me things that explode, he said, and he began to unknot Q's laces. He slipped his finger underneath them, and then underneath the tongue, and loosened them. Right shoe. He slid it off, Q's toes momentarily cool even through the socks, and he wondered a bit about the smell. He hadn't been home in a while. But Bond just took the shoe again, and the shoehorn, and put the slim end of it against Q's heel. It opens up, he said. Goes well with the lock-picking part, then. Quite. Bond began to lower Q's foot back into his shoe. It was an easy glide-in. I should warn you that I may be developing a fetish, though possibly that's just you. Well, Bond said, his mouth close to Q's foot, I don't actually like exploding pens as much as I like getting you to make them for me. He would make Bond 1,000 exploding pens and put them in an exploding pen case, and Bond would use them to write on exploding paper, for all Q cared about it in that particular moment. He said, I like making you things, and he couldn't control the odd thing his voice was doing, or the way he couldn't stop smiling, so to shut himself up, and to make sure he didn't look like the class picture of himself with what was practically a moo, for fuck's sake, he dragged Bond up, or himself down, he wasn't precisely sure which, and kissed him. He was bloody sick of simmering anyway, and Bond had taught him the value of explosions. Thanks for listening.